Today, we're joined by the team from the University of Tennessee's Information Integrity Institute. And so this group does interdisciplinary research to basically assist the public in discerning credible versus untrustworthy information. And in today's sort of rapidly developing media landscape and the use of AI becoming more of a household thing for students and faculty and the basically the public at large. They're going to help us to kind of navigate that crazy ecosystem. So this we have Dr. Catherine Luther. She's the institute director, as well as Dr. Matthew Craig, who is a postdoctoral researcher. And today they're going to combine their powers and their expertise to present to us the presentation of Navigating Truth in the AI Era, Science Communication and Information Integrity. So we're super excited that you all are here and are super excited to hear what our experts have to teach us today.
So yes, thank you so much for the invitation today. Matthew and I are both very pleased to be here. So I'm Catherine Luther. I'm the director of the Information Integrity Institute. I'm also a professor in the School of Journalism and Media. And then you'll hear from Matthew later on. He is a postdoc, currently a postdoc with the Information Integrity Institute. And I should mention it's housed in the College of Communication and Information. But we're really excited for him because he's starting this fall as an assistant professor at Central Michigan University. So we're sad to have him leave, but at the same time, very, very happy about his new position. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to start off by, first of all, hopefully you can see this okay. Okay, to define truth. So what exactly is truth? So when you look at the Oxford Dictionary and their definition of truth, it's truth is a fact or a belief that is accepted as true. So that's a very basic definition. When you look at the work of Jürgen Habermas, very influential philosopher and social theorist, he thought of truth, and he wrote that truth can be thought of as a product of consensus. So this notion that truth can only really exist when individuals collectively decide on what exactly is truth. So this notion of disrupting the consensus on what is true really goes back thousands of years. So throughout human history, people have inadvertently or even strategically shared information that would contradict or place doubts on what is accepted as true. So nothing new in regard to that area. But as we all know, with the internet and social media now, it's the scale and the speed in which false information is spread has exponentially grown over the past 2 decades or so. And so it has indeed become even more challenging for individuals to separate out truth from falsehood. And in this fast-paced development of artificial intelligence or AI, we really now need to examine and understand the role of AI in either exacerbating the speed of spread of false information or maintaining information integrity in our online world. And we also need to understand how individuals cognitively process online misinformation and what society can do to address these issues related to online misinformation, especially from a policy point of view. And so these are the areas that Matthew and I are going to touch on in our talk today. So I'll begin by discussing communicating science in our current online and information ecosystem, and then also how artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, might enhance or hinder science communication. And then Matthew will go on to talk about how humans tend to interact with AI-generated content, and he'll end our talk by talking about some of the policy-related strategies that can be used to address issues related to AI, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. It's perhaps an understatement to say that communicating science, again, in today's media and information ecosystem has become quite difficult. There is a need to not only navigate a complex digital landscape, but also to deal with the ease in which information produced by scientists can be easily manipulated or distort it and then spread to others. And the propagation of misinformation, disinformation through the use of digital platforms in general has become a huge issue worldwide because this is happening while traditional forms of media, legacy media, is declining in terms of their popularity. And just to give you an idea, in the recent World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, they listed misinformation and disinformation as the top global risk over the next 2 years. And so, as you can see here, it's listed before extreme weather events and societal polarization. So in my portion of the talk, I'll tend to use the word misinformation, but I did want to briefly define what that means and its distinction from the word disinformation. So misinformation can be thought of as information that is false, but the individual who is actually spreading the information does not know it's false. And so there's no malicious intent or any kind of intent to deceive here. But disinformation, on the other hand, is any kind of false information presented as credible that is spread with malicious intent. So there is an intent to deceive. As I stated at the beginning of the talk, throughout history, people have engaged in creating and spreading false information, but really with the advancements in information communication technologies and better access to the internet, as well as computer software programs, the manner and the speed in which false and often destructive information are disseminated and consumed have really dramatically changed within the past decade or so. I've been studying this for quite a while in terms of misinformation, disinformation, and we found, and others have found also, that spikes in the spread of false information tend to be event-driven. So if there's an election, then you tend to see this increase in misinformation, disinformation, for example, related to the election. They also tend to revolve around hot button issues. So if there's a particular issue that everybody is paying attention to, then that is an issue that will tend to generate a lot of misinformation and even conspiracy theories. And so during the COVID pandemic, many countries across the world, including the United States, did witness widespread misinformation and disinformation regarding the pandemic. So if we stick within the realm of health-related information, according to the 2023 report from the National Center for Health Statistics, over 58% of adults use the internet to seek health or medical information, and approximately 80% of social media users seek health-related information from social media platforms. So this is a pretty high percentage there. And in her research, sociologist Stephanie Alice Baker, she found that among young adults, TikTok is actually used, and they consider it as sort of like a search engine. It's not a search engine, but they use it as if it is a search engine to access health information. And so TikTok users from a younger generation are essentially looking for health-related topics on TikTok. In another one of her studies that focused on alternative health influencers, Baker examined cancer-related health information video posted on TikTok. And what she found was that these short videos tended to reduce complex problems into really simple solutions. She also found that visuals and verbal hooks were often used to create drama to kind of pull people in to what they were, what the influencers were posting. And she also found that misinformation was often presented in the post as well. And they also actually had links to places where they could go, another platform where they could purchase products. So they would sell these so-called cures for cancer on these other websites. And Baker notes that alternative health influencers were actually successful. It appeared to be successful because of the followers that they gained and also the monetization of the platforms. They were successful in spreading health misinformation because of the parasocial or the pseudo relationship that they were able to develop with their followers. they set themselves up actually as being much more trustworthy than the experts, the health experts, those working in the science profession. And so we're able to gain a huge following as a result of that as well. And then she also found that they were not only creating false and misleading health information, but they were also amplifying health misinformation and conspiracy theories that were developed by other individuals. So social media really is an attention economy in the sense that the goal really is to get a number of followers to monetize off their followers. And these influencers, alternative health influencers that she studied, were able to do this, indeed, made some money off of what they were doing. Another health-related issue that has continued to attract a huge number of misinformation and disinformation posts is with regard to receiving vaccinations. When you see a report in 2019, actually, by the World Health Organization, they listed vaccine hesitancy as among the top 10 global threats, actually. And although vaccine rates have increased worldwide since then, there still remains vaccine hesitancy worldwide in various different countries. And studies that have looked into this say that among the reasons that this is the case is that, first of all, personal beliefs. And so if you have a lot of beliefs that's related to safety concerns, for example, that might dissuade you from getting vaccinated. Another finding they found is one's social networks. And so, who are the individuals in your social circles? And so, depending on who you interact, either online or in person, you might become more hesitant about getting the vaccination. And then finally, they did find that online information, misinformation was a factor. So exposure to online misinformation tended to also dissuade individuals from getting the vaccination. So when news about the development of COVID-19, that vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination made headlines, you just saw a flurry of misinformation and conspiracy theories regarding that vaccination. And this was not only in the United States, but again, in other countries as well. And it got to the point where observers, scientists, and social science researchers started to use the term infodemic. And so infodemic is actually a term that was coined in 2002 by a professor who was trying to describe all of the information and misinformation that was on the internet. But then in 2020, the World Health Organization's Director General used the word when describing the proliferation of misinformation and rumor spread on social media regarding the epidemic, which then became the pandemic, because this was, at the very early stages of COVID-19, the spread of COVID-19. And so what he stated was, quote, "We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic." And since then, this word infodemic is used quite often. The National Institutes of Health now defines infodemic as the overabundance of information, some accurate and some not, occurring during an epidemic. So it really kind of gets at that idea of social media and the power of social media to spread information with regard to health-related issues or occurrences. So researchers have found that infodemic can cause confusion amongst individuals. And so there is that impact, just causing confusion because you're getting all sorts of information, contradictory information oftentimes. It can also lead to mistrust in health authorities as a result as well. And then also it undermines public health responses because people with all the information out there, they start to doubt the authority figures and then as a result might not take action that is actually being recommended to them for their health. So in this current media and information ecosystem, people really are inundated with information to begin with. We're all inundated, right, on a daily basis with information. So for the average individual, it's not an easy task really to navigate all that information and separate out what is true, what is false, what might be helpful, what might be not helpful. So this creates a situation in which people become increasingly vulnerable to health misinformation that could impact their behavior. And there's so many studies out there that have actually shown that it does indeed impact behavior. This is one study that was conducted by Lumba and his associates, and they did it in the United States and also the UK. And in both countries, what they found was that exposure to social media posts that had COVID-19 misinformation embedded within the post decreased the participants' intention to receive the vaccination. But this wasn't the case for the participants who were exposed to factual COVID-19 information. Uh, so this is, it does affect behavior. And this has become even more difficult to deal with because of trust. And so trust in all sorts of mainstream institution has been declining. Trust in mainstream media, trust in the government, trust in the healthcare system really has been declining over the past over decade or so. And so perhaps it's not surprising to know that trust in science has also steadily decreased over the years. And research has also found that public views on science-related issues, including food safety and vaccines, are now far from the views of scientists, so the experts. And there appears to be a relationship between this downward trend and trust in science and the proliferation of health-related misinformation on social media. And so when you think about what has been transpiring with misinformation and social media, and then consider the emergence of AI and the expansion of AI tools, especially generative AI tools that can produce text, images, videos, then this notion of trying to eradicate or even manage online misinformation really does become a daunting task. So, we now have user-friendly AI tools such as OpenAI's ChatGPT, and this summer they're coming out with GPT-5 actually, and then we have Google's Gemini, we have Meta's Llama 4. There are so many other software tools now available, so I'm just mentioning those that are based in the United States, but if you look at it worldwide, so many other tools, which means then that the number of AI generated content online will grow even further. So there truly is an urgent need and a strong need to think about the combined effects of AI and social media in terms of online information integrity. When you think of AI, the power of AI, you can look at it from either an optimistic point of view or a pessimistic point of view. So if we're taking it from an optimistic point of view, AI could really potentially mitigate the spread of misinformation and disinformation if it's used as either a tool to detect false information, correct the information, and then perhaps even produce information only drawn from credible sources. But the technology is still not there yet. I mean, when you look at the reports from these tech companies, they are talking about how they're addressing it, how they're getting close to it, but it's not 100% foolproof. So we're not yet there yet in terms of what technology can do to help the situation. From a pessimistic point of view, there is, of course, potential for AI to actually spread misinformation, disinformation through amplifying the misinformation created by humans or misinformation, disinformation created by AI. And so, for instance, you can, and it's already happening. So we have malicious actors that are taking advantage of opportunity to spread false information to really feed their particular agendas. And so, for instance, this could be done through the creation of publications. It could look like peer-reviewed publications, academic publications, academically focused publications, or publications focused on the profession. So could be like a journal for health science journal, but then it's fake. And if they're quite now with generative AI, it's easier to produce these publications that look real, but then they contain false information that could be quite damaging. So in all of this, it really is important to keep in mind that AI relies on existing online information or data, and that the accuracy of AI generated information is affected by the quality of the training data. So if there are biases in the data, then AI will reflect those biases in their outputs. And so one of the main challenges of AI modeling is to ensure that the model is trained on diverse and representative data sets, to avoid biases and also to enhance accuracy. And so this kind of reflects what I just said, but generative AI was essentially designed to learn to create content by extracting statistical patterns from large amounts of internet data. And AI models were intended to be trained on human-derived information or data. But now that we have AI-generated information or data, synthetic data, in the mix, this is quite different now. So I did want to highlight this particular study that was published last year in Nature. It's quite good. It's very interesting, but they demonstrate when AI models are trained on their own generated content, after several cycles, the model actually collapses and it generates nonsense. So I did want to highlight this, and just to give you an idea, because in the same Nature issue, they have this figure that they provided to really kind of illustrate what's happening there. So on the left-hand side, you see that, AI will learn to generate an image of a dog by learning from available images of dog. But since the golden retriever is overrepresented, the output will more likely resemble a golden retriever than any of the other rarer breeds. And then if the model is trained on its own generated output, it might not even include the rarer breeds. And so you see there and see that it now is just generating the golden retriever. And then after several cycles of training on their own generated data, the AI eventually will generate nonsense, which we see in D here. So the exact mechanism of why this collapse occurs is being investigated further, but what is known is that with each iteration, errors that exist in the model's prediction of reality becomes amplified. And so this becomes then part of the gibberish that is generated. So hopefully, what this demonstrates to you is that fact-based truth combined with false information generated by humans together with false information generated by generative AI really leaves us with a scenario in which combating misinformation becomes highly challenging. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Matthew, now. Hey,
Thank
Matthew, do you
you.
have?
Thank you, Catherine. I was just trying to make sure I have
Yep,
control.
you should have, but just go ahead and request it and then I'll
All right.
accept it. Okay. Okay, you should
All
have
right.
control.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me click on this window here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how people interact with AI-generated content. And then some of the different trends in policy and legislation across the United States on regulating really policy and legislation that just relates to AI in government and in the public sphere. So first, when it comes to truth, or rather AI and truth, it's a little sluggish, I think. Here we go. How people interact with AI generated content or really generated information is critical to shaping perceptions of truth. When you think about interacting with another person in communicating with them, there is this grounded understanding that when we're talking with one another, our goal here is to understand one another, right? And comprehend that, build knowledge or build relationships, etc. However, when we're interacting with an AI generated chatbot, what have you, large language models really produce information that's based on pattern recognition rather than intentional communication or factual accuracy. And what this means is that large language models are coming from a space that's not the same as people, right, of their intentions. Although it's convincingly seems though that generative AI can be a communication agent that we can build relationships with or whatnot. The one thing to keep in mind are that humans are cognitive misers, and I don't mean this as like a diss on humans, because we're great people, or great beings rather. But humans take the shortest route to arrive at an answer, and that's not their fault. That's evolutionary. And so, one of the things I study is the machine heuristic, which is the mental shortcut that people take to trusting information from a machine. And what we found in our research is that when we present a stimulus as like a machine generated or machine author or whatnot that created information, let's say about vaccines or reporting information on that, that we're able to hijack a person's automatic thinking of, oh, this information is from Fox News, it's biased. When it's presented from a machine agent, they're more likely to see it as truthful, unbiased, fair assessment on the topic area. So with humans being cognitive misers, just one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about generative AI, this is in the background, right? And so when we're more likely to believe in machine generated information, right, as Catherine was mentioning, generative AI can create misinformation, disinformation, have errors in its output. And in particular, I really don't like this term, but I don't have control over what computer scientists call things, but we refer to them as hallucinations. So generative AI, ChatGPT, can hallucinate its output and confidently produce false or fabricated information that seems believable. Here's an example of a hallucination. And this is much earlier in the dawn of releasing image generative AI or generative AI that generates images. And what the prompt was, the user was asking to create an image of salmon swimming up a stream. And because it's a large language model, right, and contextual factors aren't really cognizant in its mathematical, right, how it processes through information. This was the output. But a more problematic evidence of hallucinations can be seen in, you've probably seen this article, but it's by Guo and colleagues, published in 2024, it was in a Frontiers journal. Those of you who are either evolutionary biologists or people who study animals, you can definitely tell that that is not an accurate depiction of a mouse. However, nonetheless, it was published. It was in a peer-reviewed outlet where the authors had created these graphics of mice, and there's some other images too in it that were not accurate, that were images of cells, right? Here we are in 2024 with an article peer reviewed with a not correct image of a mouse that was generated from AI, reaching the public space. So you can see how easy it is for this hallucinations to become problematic in science communication. That article was retracted, of course, but obviously generative AI with producing false and fabricated information can be even more problematic when it reaches into public policy and legislation. For example, Minnesota recently passed a law making it illegal for people to use AI to mislead voters prior to an election. There was actually a researcher that had filed an affidavit of his expertise to share with them in support of this law, which makes sense, right? But the Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute, they were challenging it. The faculty member at Stanford submits this declaration in support of Minnesota's law. For obvious reasons, we shouldn't be using AI to mislead voters. However, it was later found that many of the citations used in the affidavit were actually hallucinated by ChatGPT 4.0 model. And so this was a fun time, obviously, for the Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute and the Upper Midwest Law Center when they point this out. The person, his name is Jeff Hancock, he's at Stanford, and he obviously apologizes for it. But this is another example in which we're seeing generative AI, the issues with it popping up into the public space. But when it comes to those real world consequences, one thing that I think a number of us can relate to are in the classroom. And there was a recent study in 2019 published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, pretty reputable outlet, by Desailliers and colleagues. And what they wanted to understand was when we're looking at active learning versus lecture style, which is better in terms of not only do students learn more with active learning, but then also do they think or feel that they learn more? And I mentioned this study, although they're not using AI, it does connect with the things that I'm talking about here. But what they did was they had a physics lesson that had two different classrooms, two different conditions. One condition, they had a class where it was just active learning. The instructor was a little removed, gave vague instructions, and to require the students to work through an issue. And then in the other condition, the lecture, the stage on the stage, if you will, the instructor was just lecturing the whole time. And what they found was that the active learning class students thought that they learned less, and those in the lecture class thought that they learned a lot. And when asked if they would take the class again, those in the active learning class said that they would never take a class with that instructor again. They hated it. Whereas those in the lecture format said that they loved the instructor, they would most definitely take it again. But in reality, much like previous literature, there's a copious literature on active learning. Active learning works, right? Those in the active learning class, they learn more, and those in the lecture class, they learn less. And I mention all this because when we're talking about generative AI, right, these different agents can produce seemingly convincingly, right, truthful information because it sounds soothing to the ear, right? We can think about its output as almost like that sage on the stage. Not that lecturers are misinforming their students, but there are broader challenges in assessing AI effectiveness and trustworthiness in the educational and informational context that have yet to be investigated. And so now I'm going to transition a bit into talking about some of the legislative trends briefly. This is, if you all remember back in January of this year, actually, surprisingly, the Biden administration put forward an executive order focused on advancing leadership in artificial intelligence and when it comes to the U.S. infrastructure. And so I bring this up as to say like, oh my gosh, we are doing things about this, states, local governments, et cetera, that it is on their radar. But I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what those trends are. So emerging policy trends in the U.S., in particular, at least 31 states, and this is a 2024 report from it's like a legislative policy group, which I can grab the name later on in the Q&A. But they found that 31 states, Puerto Rico, including Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, adopted resolutions or enacted legislation around AI. And most of this, there are four distinct kind of trends in this that I want to highlight. The first trend being that a lot of governments are creating these AI task forces and working groups, which are responsible for guiding some of the different AI ethics, safety standards, and governance around adopting the use of AI, whether that's in municipalities for public facing between civilian and government side, or if that's just internal systems. Most commonly referred to as just artificial intelligence advisory council, such as the recently passed House Bill 2325 in Tennessee. The second trend that I'll mention is that there's legislation that's regulating the use of AI by government agencies. So not only are they creating different task forces, but they're also legislating around how can and what do we do to use what we already know about AI in government. So for example, the Hawaii State Senate Bill 2284 enacted legislation that essentially put forward this, we need to develop a wildfire forecast system, rightfully so, if you think about the time last year with the Hawaii wildfires, but a forecast system for forecasting the risk of wildfires statewide, partnering with universities to use AI for this. The third trend, which was a little surprising to me, but also not surprising given our current climate, and then also some of the things that Catherine had recently mentioned about problematic use of AI, is the criminalization of AI misuse. So this, for example, so criminalizing when bad actors are using generative AI, whether that's in elections or if that's related to child pornography. So, for example, South Dakota last year passed a bill that essentially updated their sexual criminalization laws to include that if people are creating simulated images of child pornography, that is a criminal act. So revising that. And then the last trend that I found was that there's different legislation that's promoting the use of AI in ways that really affect education. In particular, we saw last year, Florida passed a House bill that actually put forward a grant program to give money to school districts to implement AI in support of students and teachers. There's also Tennessee last year that enacted legislation that created they not only created an AI task force, but they also made it a requirement that higher education institutions, in addition to K through 12 public schools and charter schools, that they have to develop policies around how they allow students, teachers, faculty, staff, et cetera, to use generative AI. And that was just in Tennessee very recently. And so that's what we have here today in talking about the dangers of disinformation, misinformation, really talking about when it comes to truth in this age of combating so much mis and disinformation, but then also AI making that more problematic. We encourage you to reach out to us via email, connect with us. We're a new institute, and we're so happy to have been here. And thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you all so very much. I think at this point, we've got some great time for questions and discussion. I have some questions myself, but let me open it up to everyone and see what you think. Feel free to just unmute yourselves, or you can put questions in the chat if you'd prefer to do it that way.
And let's see, sorry, Ashley, would you like us to stop sharing screen or keep this up?
Yeah, sure. And then if someone has a reference to one of your slides, we can pull it back up. But
Okay.
yeah, we can close that for now.
I have a question. First, thank you so much for this presentation. It was amazing and very helpful. I appreciate all of the background and knowing how long these things have been going on. Have you found that there is anything we can do as human writers with access to real information to distinguish ourselves from AI, or anything that we can do to kind of start refostering that trust with the public?
Yeah, so I'll mention that as individuals, it's very difficult. I mean, you could try, but what tech companies now are doing, they are creating watermarks, and so they're supposed to put a watermark on informations, so individuals can distinguish what is true and what is false, what was generated by artificial intelligence, and so that would actually help the situation. But the issue that I see with that is that all the tech companies have to work together to do this. So it's not enough to have just one tech company or even two tech companies. There really has to be a collaboration between the tech companies to move forward with this watermarking. But yeah, your question is really good in terms of what individuals can do. I mean, there's this verification system that helps, and so that you can show that you do have credentials and that you are a legitimate source in providing the information, but at a broader scale, it's still quite difficult, I think. Matthew, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say I've been looking at machine agents, machine authorship, looking at the authenticity aspects of that since like 2018. And so my research got popular really quickly, but popular in ways that were like, it's very interesting to see perspectives out there with tech companies releasing these technologies so quickly without a lot of regulatory oversight. And so like I guess some some things that we can do individually, right, are to, engage in, I always go back to engaging with legislators and writing to your representative, and with different legislation that might be on the docket, and things that are related to this area that you support or don't support, that are related to regulating AI. On a more individual, personal basis, right? Like it's hard to, I think we're going to get to a point where, when it comes to communication, like communicating with people, there's going to be a lot of suspect as to whether you're real or not, just given the current amount of generative AI that's out there. Pew just did a recent poll, asking people about their encounters with generative AI or web pages that mention AI, and I think it was like around over 50% of the population said that when they, like with online shopping platforms, like that they've seen at least one page that mentions AI. And so I apologize, I don't have a lot of good answers for you at this present moment, because I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done on things like that, related to the authenticity component. But I know that there are a lot of people that are working on this right now.
All right, thank you
Looks like
both.
Yeah, thank you both. We have a question in the chat. Is there data on the distribution of mis versus disinformation, such as topic, demographics of people posting, locations, percentages of each, and how easily is it to differentiate between mis and disinformation?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a good question. There are still challenges in doing so. And so what's happening, so you can take a topic and try to find out and find out, well, who exactly are the individuals posting false information or misleading information. And so if you do a study, but still you're still kind of looking at data that you're collecting and then using different methods, computational analyses methods to look at that. But in terms of who are the individuals posting, that's really difficult, because there are ways to kind of look at geolocations, but there are also ways to pretend like you're in Iceland, for example, when you're actually sitting here in the United States posting. So that's why it's difficult to track down these individuals, and initiate some sort of legal action against them. So a great question. And, I think that that's something that everybody is trying to look at now, in terms of trying to track down, well, who are the individuals? There are ways, it's again, a particular topic. So I study Russian disinformation. And so they were able to look at, okay, where do they tend to cluster in terms of where the individuals are located that generate this information. So that's how they found out that a lot of it's just high school kids, for example, or youngsters in Macedonia who are generating this and getting paid to do this. But it's a great question, because this is an important question that we have to tackle. Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I've received, and this is before my work at the Institute, but I've also done a number of political consulting work with organizations back in Michigan. And this is a question that I think is in the minds of a lot of people. And how do we detect disinformation, misinformation? How do we flag that, regulate that further? But then also, how do we best distinguish between malicious and innocent? And that's really difficult to do with how available this technology is. But then also, most often, right, we're more in the post phase. It's hard we can never predict the future, right? Bad actors are going to be bad actors, and we're most often catching the end of it, in which the effects are already there. The calls have already gone out to voters about a certain some sort of astroturfing, if you will, of disinformation rather. One thing I think individually that we can do are when really relate to informational literacy, and engaging in click withhold, where you come across information and or click restraint rather, come across a piece of information, you search for it on the internet, read through all the results, restrain from clicking all of them, and then open multiple tabs or multiple windows, and then scroll through those different evidence of whether or not that piece of information is real or not. And that's actually something that's guidance or tips that are put forward by PBS. They have a program that for children's AI or information literacy, excuse me, and other groups as well adopt that practice or that recommendation.
I think there was a follow-up question to that one as well. What do you think the relationship is between increasing distrust in science and the amount of mis and disinformation out there? This person said, I imagine it's bidirectional relationship, but which seems to be the driving force?
Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't catch that last part. Yeah, so with the increasing distrust in science, distrust in science is not a new thing. That's a recurring thing that has happened historically, and I think that's a question that people have been really trying to tackle, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. In trying to combat misinformation and disinformation. And I would say, communication, and this is because I'm classically trained in the communication social sciences field, is really important for that. And I say that with the understanding that when we have, when we bring things down to an understandable level or an area where we focus on the direct impacts of people, and not get into the minutia of theory, et cetera, results, findings, statistics, we're more apt to have that information digested. But that's also a complicated, recommendation, because there's so much interdisciplinary work that would have to happen to really advance that at a community level, which is most needed. I think your imagination of a bidirectional, relationship is not without evidence. I think that there's definitely, I would agree with you that there are some sort of a relationship there, but the driving force, I think, really comes down to culturally, like in the United States, for example, how we view science, how we view academia in general, and information, and trusting that information outside of all the other things that complicate it, like partisan cues, socioeconomic status, various other aspects that are impacting that. So not one impact, but multiple.
Yeah, and I'll also add that I agree with what Matthew said, and I do think it is bidirectional, because oftentimes, if you don't trust science, and then you trust misinformation, the individuals who are posting it are amplifying that misinformation and then feeding into further distrust of science. And so it's again, misinformation. Oftentimes the individuals really do believe the information, so they don't think it's false information, and so they try to spread it because they think, oh, we're going to help other individuals, bring light to this issue. But then that again feeds into distrust of science, because it's contrary to what scientists are saying.
I'm going to summarize the next one in the chat, but basically saying that people are claiming that the new versions of models are going to be trained on factual information. But they're asking, is there any way to learn how each AI product is trained? Seems like the black box of training models makes this person reluctant to use AI for information seeking.
Yeah, no, I think that it is a black box, and I don't think that the information would ever be released. And oftentimes, I think for scientists, even, they're not quite sure where the information is going, or coming from, rather. And so, I mean, I don't think you should be reluctant in using AI generated information, because there is a lot of good information out there too. And in fact, scientists are now using AI to help them with their research, to filter out or to actually pinpoint journals and articles that have been published and are available online. So there's a lot of good with regard to AI. So I hate to have us leave here thinking, oh, AI is evil, because it really is a quite useful tool, and there's so many advancements being made, but also, like I talked about in my presentation, there's a lot of gibberish. And so I think that as one of the recommendations I would make is that when you are dealing with AI generated content, that you fact check it. So it doesn't have to be everything, but really if they do list sources that they're drawing from, check out those sources to make sure that they're legitimate sources as well. But it would be difficult to have full transparency there. And yeah, and tech companies now, I mean, for the longest time, like, when it was Twitter, they would allow scientists, social science researchers to actually take the data API, using API, and that's gone now. And so it's hard to really double check. And so ideally, these tech companies will just allow their data to be examined. And that would certainly help the situation.
I have kind of a follow-up question to that. In the meantime, like before we might get some transparency, it seems to me like I've played around with multiple different generative AIs, and it seems like Perplexity AI is a lot better at like giving you the references that it's pulling from than ChatGPT, where you can actually like go click on the article that it's pulling from to do that information verification, like you're saying. But is there a way that we, as the prompter, can get the AI to give us the resources? I don't know if that's a tool that we have.
Yeah, so that is not a tool that we have. So most often, I mean, tech companies, if we think about the Silicon Valley culture, it's proprietary information, regardless of regulatory oversight, even, right? And it's very difficult to determine. I mean, like there's published papers conceptually on like GPT models, but that's not at all helpful in determining, where does it get its information, where does it pull from, right? And it's even more problematic when, like I mentioned before, with people being more likely to believe information generated from a machine is truthful, honest, unbiased, accurate. That's really difficult. But one thing, going back to that previous question too, I do want to say, one issue that we're facing that's beyond just like the disinformation and misinformation is the environmental impact of these technologies. And in particular, it's already projected that water usage from generative AI could hit 6.6 billion metric cube. I think it's metric cube by 2027. And so like there's a huge environmental impact on this. And though these tech companies with their proprietary models, proprietary technology, will say that it will get better, will lessen our water footprint or environmental impact, how much can we actually trust that that's actually going to make a difference?
And just to answer Ashley's question too, yeah, perplexity, if I could say the word. Actually, I've talked to a number of researchers. They tend to mention Perplexity as being a good tool in comparison, like you said, to the other tools. I will say also, when you're doing searches or you're entering a query into ChatGPT, for example, I would suggest that you change the prompt. So change your question as well. And you could kind of compare the responses being generated depending on the question you're answering, or you're asking rather. So I use that as a technique too, to see, okay, what exactly are they telling me? Does it depend on how I'm actually framing my particular question?
And I don't want to perpetuate misinformation, but go into what Dr. Craig was saying about the water usage. I did see something recently that was like, when you type into Google and it automatically gives you the AI generated answer, that like that's something like a liter of water it costs to like cool the server to do that search. And so if you are really environmentally conscious and you're trying to not get that automatic generated answer when you don't want it, you can just put -AI like in the search bar with whatever you're searching and it won't give it to you. So I just saw that, but don't quote me on the liter of water. I don't want to perpetuate anything inaccurate here, but I thought that was an interesting thing I just came across.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Please go.
No, I was just gonna say, like in 2022, like I mean, it cited that Google's data centers used about 5 billion gallons of fresh water for cooling. But that's it. Please continue. Sorry.
No, I missed a question coming in the chat, which was just how effective is education in countering mis and disinformation and helping other people learn to identify accurate and false information.
I think it still needs to be developed, but certainly AI literacy, media literacy, are areas that I think that all schools should be teaching, high schools, and I see that we are moving in that direction, especially in Tennessee. And so I think it is a good thing. They'll learn the basics, but I think there are helpful information that you could share with students, the community members in terms of how do you identify when it is disinformation. That it's hard to go into now, but you can tell by the wording as well and how phrases are used, whether it's just kind of generated this sort of standard information. And just to let you know, with regard to disinformation, what the research has shown is that they tend to be very similar. And the reason why this is the case is because they tend to be released because they want to do a synchronous release that's rapid. And so you can start to detect, but you really have to study it in terms of wording and phrases that are used. Matthew, do you have anything there?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add other than, yeah, I think that there's research, current research that's going on, or projects that are going on, not in my wheelhouse, but in areas that focus on the effectiveness of lesson planning around teaching people how to, or teaching kids how to recognize misinformation and disinformation. But there's also some questions of the effectiveness of that lead us to say it's very complicated, given the additional external layers of belief systems and et cetera that are related to what we might determine is or is not misinformation.
Well, I think we're just about out of time. If no one has any further questions, does anyone have maybe one more question we can plug in at the end here? All right. Thank you all so much. It was a great presentation, and I think we all gained some real valuable insight into sort of the patterns of the ecosystem, as you've called it, which I think is really great. So, and I think we did have somebody ask if the slides could be made available, and we can email, Alyssa can chat with you all after if you're willing to share those. But yeah, thank you very much again, and hopefully everybody that's still here, we'll see you guys next month.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank you.